United we're as strong as a mountain. United we... This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek and LaborFest. And the event that we're having today is about the struggle in Panama and both the labor issues, some of the worker issues in Panama, as well as privatization and the environment. And Panama has come into the news, obviously, recently because of the threat by Trump to invade the country and to take it over. um, and, basically make it another U.S. colony. So joining us this afternoon is Valielza Wynn O'Keefe. And also joining us is Julian Di Gortori, and he's also going to speak about the struggle in Panama. And I've been covering it. And there was an interview with some Suntrack unionists there. And since that time, there's been increasing repression. So this is an important issue for the American working class, and also building solidarity with the workers and people of the Panama. So you want to go first, Valley?
So yeah, obviously there's been a lot of political unrest in Panama for many months. Some would argue that this has kind of been going on for a few years now. One of the central demands in the protest has been actually making sure that this copper mine is called Cobre Panama and is owned by this Canadian company called First Quantum. This copper mine is really huge. It's on one of the world's largest reserves of copper. It provides, I think, or used to provide 1% of the world's copper supply. So, really substantial. But it was a really unpopular mine. It definitely represented, I think, just again, a lot of like imperialism, other countries coming into the country to pillage natural resources. It was causing a lot of damage to local communities. They were getting really toxic runoff streams from the mine. It was making people sick, and it was turning the drinking water like completely opaque, like white and slimy. So there's a lot of concerns. And to top it all off, this Canadian company was profiting from the copper in Panama, but the Panamanian government was getting very little of the profits. It was actually shockingly small. How little the government was getting for it. And so the people weren't only enraged by the fact that it was environmentally destructive and that it was extracting their natural resources, but the fact that, the government was willing to give up so much for very, very little in return. So it really sparked a series of protests that really took off. I want to say it was like mid 2023, and it really stretched on well into 2024. And I think December 2024 is when the Panamanian Supreme Court actually relented and actually said, okay, well, after looking at the Constitution, we've determined that the legal foundations that the mine was, constructed on is unconstitutional and therefore has to be shut. But this is in response to tremendous political pressure. This is after many, many months of widespread strikes, protests. I mean, I think a lot of people were saying that they hadn't seen a protest movement that was so unanimous and so lively since they were protesting the dictatorship of Noriega in the late 80s. So this is really, really historic. And the way that people were just very unanimous in getting this copper mine closed, because they didn't really care. They don't care that Panama has access to one of the world's largest reserves of copper, because it's destructive, and they've made it very clear that they don't want to be a mining country. They don't want the natural beauty of Panama to be, pillaged for this Canadian company. They're like, we don't care. We're not going to let you come in and extract this. So after many, many months of protests, the mine was closed. And I think the Panamanian Supreme Court ruled that in December 2024. But there's definitely just been a lot of concerns around a reopening, because there was a new president that was elected in 2024. His name is Molino. He was official in previous administrations. He actually was a political figure that was actually calling for the American invasion of Panama in 1989 when they went to go retrieve Noriega. So he has a history of being extremely pro-American, pro-imperialist, pro extracting everything that Panama has to offer in order to satisfy business interests. Um, so he was elected, and ever since then, well, elected is also questionable because actually, according to the Constitution, he wasn't supposed to run. The Constitution of Panama says that anyone that has previously been in prison is not allowed to run for president, and he was in jail for some time, along with the previous president Martinelli, was also in jail. So they were both technically ineligible, but the Supreme Court had some secret hearing, and they said 2 or 3 days before the election that he was allowed to run. And then he mysteriously won despite having not a lot of popular support. It's actually insane how unpopular this man is. And I talking to people that live there, they say that, having Molino is very much like having their own version of Trump. To give you an idea of how unpopular he is, but also how far right he is and how far right his government is. But ever since he's been elected, he's been threatening to reopen the mine. And he says that, he talks a lot about making Panama like a very pro-business government and doing everything in the interest of business in order to increase profits. And his government very much wants to depict, Panama as a very, relaxing, luxurious place for people to go and like invest or go retire if you're wealthy enough. So the protesters have been really disrupting that narrative and really making him quite upset. So yeah, that's, I would say, like a brief summary of what's going on in terms of the environmental concerns in the copper mine.
Okay, thank you. And I know also that there have been unions, Suntrack and the unions have supported this campaign against the mine, against the copper mining and the pollution. So that's important. So Julian, you want to give a report on what's going on with labor and working class in Panama?
Well, hello everyone. My name is Julian, as Steve already presented me. What's happening right now? As Comrade Valielsa already was commenting, previously there was this massive movement against this mining company that was there only to continue extracting natural resources that are in Panamanian territory, something that occurs in many Latin American countries, which have been reduced to these repositories of resources to be extracted cheaply by these transnational companies, in this case by this Canadian company, but that also happens in Mexico and many other parts. So the people were able to get this victory, but the thing is that the capitalist class in Panama still has many things to steal the workers, some of the victories of the workers that they have obtained in the past. They still have many things that they want to dismantle from this very small welfare state that the workers of Panama were able to build in the 20th century, and that after the invasion of the US, with this new phase of neoliberalism, the capitalist class has been trying to dismantle these small benefits that workers still get. Some of those benefits are like state-managed pensions, no, among other things, among for example, healthcare given also by sponsored by the state, and all these benefits that are given to workers. But again, since the neoliberal period that was inaugurated after the invasion of the US to Panama in 1989, the capitalist class has been wanting to basically take back everything that the workers got. And now, right now, with Trump in the presidency, the capitalist class now has all the power to actually, or all the backing all the backing needed to start dismantling, start taking away all these victories that the working class had in the past, starting with the pensions. Particularly this year, at the beginning of this year, there's this law, which is the 462 law, which basically starts the road to privatize the pensions of the Panamanian people, and also kind of allows for increasing the age of retirement, as well as allows now the private managing of pensions, no, that obviously many capitalists will want to try to profit from this managing, instead of previously when it was only the state that was guaranteeing that these workers got their pensions, no? And now all of this is actually making sure that workers, when they retire, they will just get a miserable pension. So starting on the beginning of this year, the first people that went to strike were the teachers' unions. And then again, we have these other unions such as Suntrax, which is the union for the construction workers that are a very big union and militant union. Then we have also the banana workers, no, that also joined this protest, students, like many sectors of the population, also indigenous peoples, because the attack against the working class was unfortunately not only limited to this attack to their pensions, but the thing is that in this period also, this new president of Panama, which is Jose Raul Mulino, has has had this agreement with the Trump administration, so that they allow the U.S. troops to come again to Panama in supposedly to take care of the Panamanian Canal, that to provide security services. No, they are allowing these U.S. troops to be temporarily in the next to the Panamanian Canal zone, and again in supposedly to provide security. But we know that this is mainly one of these other like it's part of these steps the U.S. is taking in order to make sure that the American continent is under its control and it expels any influence of China, no? Which they falsely claim that China was getting many privileges and that U.S. boats were getting charged too much, which was totally false. But now, actually, with this new arrangement that the Panamanian president has gotten with Trump, now some boats from the U.S. military can pass through the Panamanian Canal without any charge. No, so again, we are seeing slowly or maybe more rapidly how the U.S. is again going back on its promises of leaving Panama as a sovereign state, and again, which until 1999, let's remember that the U.S. occupied parts of the Panamanian Canal. No, there were actually military bases, U.S. military bases along the Panamanian Canal, and we should also remember that that was the place where the School of Americas was. No, this school was the one that trained many right-wing generals across the South America, across Latin America, which promoted all these dictatorships. So after 1999, when these bases were supposed to be dismantled and the Panamanian Canal was given back to the Panamanian people, the U.S. troops left, but now, again, they are returning back, the U.S. troops, and obviously the people are very angry because they are seeing how their country is being, again, occupied by the U.S. forces. And obviously this is coupled with all this reactivation of the copper mining, which, again, the Panamanian president knows it can do this because he has the backing of Trump, no? They know that they can, again, attack the population because now they have this support guaranteed by Trump. And actually, right now, the issue is not only the reactivation of this copper mining, but also they are trying to do a project to basically change, I don't know how to say, a river to make it go into the Panamanian Canal, no, like change its direction, which also will affect many local communities, will displace people. But again, they don't care because they only care about the profits that will be made from the Panamanian Canal, which, again, we should understand that is the profits that go from the Panamanian Canal go to the rich people in Panama, not go to the people. And again, all these extractivist projects are meant also to provide benefits to this capitalist class. So again, we are seeing like it's not only the issue of the pensions, not only the issue of the mining, reactivation of the mining copper project, but it's also also part of the new occupation of U.S. troops of the Panamanian Canal that is actually making people go out in the streets, go out into strikes. Again, the teachers' unions are not only striking because of the pensions, but they are also striking because of the U.S. intervention. No, and the problem is also that not a lot of information is getting out of Panama. There's actually a I don't know, the media are not actually taking out all this news out of Panama, and there's kind of a blackout of Panama, and actually many bad things have been happening in Panama. There's already have been an emergency state, a state of emergency in one of the provinces, which is Boca de Toros. Well, I think, sorry if I mistake the name, but the thing is that
It's Bocas del Toro.
Boca de Toro, no? So the problem is that the Panamanian state is using all the force it has to repress the population. There's also reports of disappearances, forced disappearances, which I guess in Latin America is not that strange. But again, we have the state is kidnapping people, disappearing them. They're using real bullets to stop these protests, no? So it's and obviously they have been arresting people from the union, from Suntrax. One of its leaders is exiled in the embassy of Bolivia because they're being attacked by the Panamanian government, and there's no one to go against them because they have the backing of the U.S. So this is a very concerning situation that should unite all the people around the world, especially in the U.S., because it's from the U.S. that this Panamanian government is obtaining its all its power, all its this confidence to repress its own population. No, well, I'm going to leave it at this point.
One of the things is that the United States basically wants to resurrect the Monroe Doctrine, which is that the United States, Latin America belongs to the United States. And I think that we have to look at the attack on Panama as part and parcel of the effort for the United States to take back control of Latin America and Central America and to stop any opposition. And I think that even in Argentina, for example, there's Zionists that have gone to Patagonia and are given special rights by Milei. But there's an effort by U.S. imperialism to reassert its attack. And one of the problems is that there isn't, not only is there information blockade, but there doesn't seem to be any solidarity. For example, Suntrax is the leader of Suntrax is part of the Construction Workers Union Federation globally. But there's been no campaign by this union federation to defend these unionists who have been in jail or trying to escape. So there's a failure of the unions and the union structure to actually organize an international campaign, so to publicize it and demand an end to the repression for the removal of the U.S. troops. And I think that that's something that we have to begin to discuss with people, because Panama may be a small country, but it's an example of what U.S. capitalism is doing, U.S. imperialism is doing. I mean, if they can get away with it in Panama, they'll certainly spread that out to other countries in Latin and Central America. So I think it's important that we have this discussion and talk about Panama and what we can do to build solidarity with it. Are there any comments or questions? We had an interview with the leader of the union several months ago, and he went over their organizing against the repression, and they had rallies. In fact, I think it pissed the United States off because after rallies, they were attacking U.S. imperialism directly. And that was, I'm sure it made the U.S. government very angry to have Panamanians directly attacking U.S. imperialism in Panama. And that's one of the things that they've got the government to try to repress. Is there any information about other any mobilization or effort, or basically in Panama, it seems like they've kept it isolated to Panama? Because I mean, there are Panamanian consulates all over Latin America. I mean, there could be action in Latin America, Central America, and the United States.
I haven't heard much personally. One thing I did want to say was there was an article that came out yesterday, and I can post it in the chat. And I think the teachers that were still on strike, and it seems like a lot of them had started to return to the schools, but officially the strike for the teachers was called off, and schools reopened yesterday. for the first time in 2 months, which is pretty notable because I think the only other time the schools have been closed so long was like a 3-month strike, like 20, 30 years ago. And the article definitely takes a little bit of a defeatist tone, but yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot of the demands that the union was making were able to be met before they were kind of forced to return. So
Yeah, well, I think, it'd be good to reach out to some of the teachers and unions if we can have them on and get their voices out. I mean, that's very important because of this information blockade that the capitalists are doing. They don't want people to even know about what's happening in Panama.
mhm.
So very few people even knew about it, and there are teacher unions here who there could be some solidarity with if they knew what was going on in Panama.
Global international solidarity is a must to actually be able to push against all these measures from the Panamanian government, because again, right now it knows that it has the full backing of the US, so it can do whatever they want, including repressing its whole population, because again, who's going to try to go against this government that has all the backing of the world's greatest superpower, no? So that is why, again, we have to, in the US, through all Latin America, we have to start agitating, start breaking first through this media. I don't know what was the correct word, but this media blockade. Be able to tell people what's happening there, and organize to at least start making some protests outside, again, Panamanian consulates or Panamanian embassies, and to make sure that these our voices are heard in the outside Panama, that we know what's happening there, and we are going to be fighting also their fight and not leave them alone, no? Because we are all part of the same working class, and we have the same enemy, which is right now working with the Panamanian government to repress its population.
Something I just wanted to chime in on was I really wanted to chime in on the role of Chiquita Banana in all of this, because they have, really, really taken advantage of the political situation. They fired, I want to say, anywhere between 5 to 6,000 of their workers in Changuinola, which is in the Bocas del Toro province. So they pretty much fired their entire workforce in Panama in response to the strike. And I would really, really love to try to get into contact with any of those workers. I think the Molino government has responded very callously, saying, oh, well, it's deserved because they were the ones that disrupted business. I think Chiquita Banana said that they lost like $10 million in, response to the strike or whatever. And yeah, I guess I'm just really concerned about those workers. I'm concerned about their ability to find other employment, because unemployment is really, really high in Panama, like really high. I want to say like 1 in 4 people are unemployed or something like that. And that's like good times for the country, right? People are often living on salaries of a couple $100s a month, if that. And then if you work for the government, you're lucky to get paid. Sometimes they frequently go months without getting paid. I can attest to that personally. My uncle is a nurse who works for a public hospital, and he sometimes goes months without getting paid, right? And I'm just really, really concerned about these workers, because I'm not sure what they're going to do without Chiquita Banana. And it's a shame because Chiquita Banana, which was previously the United Fruit Company, has just reaped so much devastation in Panama and Colombia, right? The term Banana Republic, I think, specifically refers to like both of these countries and the way that these companies have been able to just completely, fund corruption. I think last year, Chiquita Banana finally faced some sort of legal penalty for their hand in funding Colombian terrorism, because a US court actually found that no, they were guilty of funding Colombian terrorists that were executing families. And so they were forced, or they've been ordered to pay $40 million in settlement fines to families in Colombia. They say they're going to appeal the ruling, but it was pretty historic because that was the first time, I think, in a very long time that a corporation has been held liable for human rights abuses and their part in it. And yeah, so it's a strange situation, because even though Chiquita Banana is really terrible, and I think their influence in the country has been much worse than anything else, it's also like the only source of employment that these people have. So it's like, what are they going to do in the meantime? Is the government going to guarantee anything, for them to get by in the meanwhile while they try to I know they're trying to restart negotiations with Chiquita Banana because bananas are like almost 20% of the country's exports. Like it would be devastating for the economy if they were no longer exporting bananas. So it's like not really an option, I think, realistically, to just stop that practice. But I'm just really concerned about those workers, and I wish we could hear from them. Yeah.
Well, one of the other things that we have to also uh, look at is the government, the fascist government, because what they're doing now, for example, against Bolsonaro, is saying they're going to use trade war to force a political change and to bring back this Bolsonaro government. And he did that with Colombia, threatened Colombia with I think 50% or 25% increase in their tariffs unless they allowed them to dump people there without any kind of proper procedure for the deportation of people. So I think we're going to see this more and more, and that is the use of U.S. capitalism, U.S. imperialism by a fascist government, brutally saying to countries, "My way or the highway. You either do what we want, or we're going to destroy you." And I think that's becoming more and more flagrant. And I think that that's something that has to be organized against, and people have to be educated about it, what's happening in Latin America and Central America, because most people are unaware of the political ramifications, economic ramifications of U.S. imperialism now in Central and Latin America. And the fact that there's been no information about what's going on in Panama is very disturbing. I mean, Trump made a big hullabaloo threatening Panama, threatening to invade it, saying the Chinese have been taken over. Then it disappears from the news, and workers are in jail, and there's repression and terror in Panama, and nobody knows about it. So I think I'm glad we're having this, and we're part of a network. I'm part of a network of Argentinians and Italians and Turkish and Greek people and others, and maybe we can have an international day of action for Panama to work towards something like that. That we have action internationally around the defense of the Panamanian working class. The other thing is we definitely have to reach out to the workers there, the teachers and the construction workers, and get them involved in this, because I know that they're affiliated with other federations around the world, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of organizing on an international level to get these unions together internationally so we can act together. If we could get the teachers union, other construction union to do something, to make a call for international action, that would have a big impact on Panama. And that would build solidarity that they're not alone, they're not by themselves and against, this United States, monolith, So that I think that's important and something we should work on.
Well, I would only like to add, for example, I think that's what you say, Steve, is totally, I totally support that. And with what Valielsa, sorry if I mispronounced your name, was saying, with this problem, I think we face in Latin America, no? Okay, if we protest, these companies threaten to go, and if they're threatened to go, the workers are like thrown into the wild, no? Like they're laid off, and that's it, no? The company gets all its machines and gets back to its country of origin, which is usually the US or a European country. But and yeah, that's unfortunately what they have made of Latin America, no? With all this neoliberalization, what they did is all these countries were at some point trying to create their own industry to be able to address their own local demand. Only it was usually in the limits of the capitalist system, no? But even then, it provided a little bit of welfare to the workers. But then neoliberalism came in place, destroyed all these industries, and left these countries as just sources of cheap labor and sources of cheap extraction of resources, no? So that is what Panama, what other countries in Latin America are, no? They are just places where transnationals come, they exploit the labor, they extract the resources, and they do whatever they want because they know that these countries don't have any other source of employment for their workers or any industry that can provide these jobs, no? So we're kind of trapped in this cycle, which unfortunately doesn't have any short-term solution, and the only solution is long-term, and it's only through breaking through these chains of imperialism that has maintained us in this state of being subdued, no, of not allowing our countries to develop. I think that's the thing to understand. And to be able to actually, and to do that, actually, I had to break with imperialism. We also had to break with this capitalist class, parasitical capitalist class that relies on the US also to enforce order in this region. And we have to ally all the Latin American peoples, no, to be able to go against the US. Well, also ally with the US workers, no, to go against the US capitalist class, no, and against this whole capitalist class, and be able to reach a new order where workers are the ones that decide how things should be, no. But obviously, there's many steps in between. But I think that's just to like kind of frame this issue of why are workers so disadvantaged in Latin American countries. Well, it's not necessarily because it's because of historical reasons that are actually part of a plan created by the US to make Latin America actually its backyard, no, and function as its backyard to again get cheap labor and cheap resources. So yeah, I just wanted to frame that.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you, Julian. Yeah, you did say my name right. It's funny. My name is a Latin name, so Spanish speakers tend to be able to say my name correctly. Yeah, I just really wanted to echo what you were just saying, and I think something that I find really remarkable personally. So, my mom is from Panama. She immigrated here in the early 90s, to escape what she said was, rampant unemployment and extremely corrupt regime, right? She really wanted to have a future where she could stand to make more than a couple $100s a month because that was really the only avenue available to her. She got an accounting certification, so it was kind of like the way it was explained to me was like you either went to engineering or accounting, and there wasn't really anything anything in between. So she immigrated here for that, and experienced a really big boost to her quality of life. Um, and something that she always told me was like, oh, my people, my country, they will strike over anything. They'll strike over this, they'll strike over that. And she loves to tell the story of how we're actually in Costa Rica when I was young. And we actually were stuck there because the streets were blockaded. And I think we missed our flight. And so we ended up being stuck in Costa Rica for multiple days. And my poor mother, she was a single mom. So it's just me and my toddler self and my younger sister, like stuck in Costa Rica. And she was like, these freaking workers, right? So I grew up in a very like anti-union household because I think she really she really lived, I think, uh, in a context where she was very inconvenienced, I think, by a lot of the political goings on, like blockades meant that people wouldn't get food, right? So it became like very hard to like figure out what to eat after a certain point. I actually have a friend who was telling me that a friend of hers went to Bocas del Toro right before the blockade started as a vacation because there are like some islands out there, there's some nice beaches, people like to go there to vacation. And she went, and then the strikes and the blockade started. She was stranded there for 2 months, and by the time she was finally able to come back to her original region, which I think is David, she came back and she had lost a bunch of weight because the blockades made it like really, really difficult for people to access food, right? So you're really dependent on like what's growing in your neighbor's yard, right? And fortunately, since it's a tropical climate, like things tend to like, people have avocado trees and mango trees and stuff like that. But it's like, I don't think people really understand what it's like to live in a situation that can be really tenuous like that. So it's just interesting, and I think the average Panamanian person does not have a positive view of like a lot of these like militant workers traditions, and I'm wondering how we can start to bridge that. But what I will also say is that I've also been super impressed by despite not having a lot of resources, the way that unions are able to activate and mobilize on what seems like a turn of a hat, at least for us in America, because we still can't get our shit together to do a general strike. Like the way that they're able to band together to accomplish political objectives like closing the copper mine, like closing, Cobre Panama is really amazing to me. And I think it just really shows, how political organization, it's not so much about the money you have, it's not so much about, your class. Well, it is about banding together the working class, but it's just about, your communities, your networks, how you can get people to understand what's going on and being willing to commit to things. And I think that's something that's personally impressed me. And I think it's been interesting just kind of charting the way I grew up, which viewing the striking as like a bad thing. But then as I became politically educated, being like, oh wait, no, like Panamanians are able to accomplish so much politically. And I would argue that, in terms of like their class consciousness, way more advanced than the average American because they're forced to, right? Like there's no other option. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, it's one of the things that Gabriel, who's apparently not been able to make it, is from Panama, but his family came from Jamaica to build the canal. And one of the things that Trump lied about was that a lot of Americans died in the building of the canal. That's a falsification. Most of the workers were from other countries imported, including Jamaica, where his family's from. So, I mean, basically, it was the importation of workers. And the other thing that we have to look at in what's going on in Panama and all of Latin America is migration is caused by U.S. imperialism, whether it's by overthrowing governments in Central Latin America or the economic deprivation that the United States brings as an imperialist power. They're not building a sustainable economy. They're basically looting the country. And that's really what their aim is loot and steal and then leave it. And the people are left on their own. So I think we really need to get the stories out about what's going on in Panama and other countries, because I think people have to understand the connection between the conditions of people in Panama and what the United States has been doing, what U.S. imperialism is doing. And I think they see that as a threat with China. China investing in Panama, building the ports and that kind of thing is a threat to U.S. interests. And it's the same all over the world. In Peru, uh, China was building a train through Peru to help it develop, and the United States did not want the Chinese to build a railroad, and they were involved in the overthrow of the Peruvian government. So the United States and the CIA are quite actively involved in trying to prevent the workers, the people, having any control of their economy. And that's really what's going on in Panama. It's going on in many countries. I don't know what's happened with Mexico, whether the Mexican government has said anything, but it seems like this attack on Panama should be addressed by other Central and Latin American countries, because it's pretty quiet, actually. There's been no protest or no even silence about what's going on. Does anyone know if there's been any protest about the?
Well, in Mexico, no, it's again, there's this blockade. I don't think people really know what's happening in Panama, not only here in the US, but I'm pretty sure, like, even among many other Latin American countries. And even then, I don't think, for example, the president of Mexico would speak against what's happening in Panama, because right now it's in a thin line trying to balancing its act with respect to Trump. So I wouldn't think that the president of Mexico would try to speak very or very outspoken of what's happening in Panama. Maybe the president of Colombia has been more confrontative to Trump in some aspects, no. But yeah, unfortunately, right now the way the world is being reconfigured with the U.S. Now behaving in a more overt way, more intervening more in an overt way. It's actually making all these governments also take a little bit of precautions. But I think in the other side, this way the U.S. is now conducting, which is overtly, is now making more obvious that many of the things that occur in these countries, or the things that are actually happening right now, what you were saying about Brazil, of imposing these tariffs to support Bolsonaro, or this attack against Colombia, no, I guess the people in those countries are realizing, like, who is the true enemy in that has made their country as it is, and has been condemning them to this underdevelopment, which is the U.S. capitalist class that right now is perfectly embodied by Trump, no? So although we are getting more, I guess, pressed more by the U.S. Imperialism, people are also now realizing clearly what's happening, no? So there's some benefits in that may lead to more unity among the working class, to later on maybe actually confront the U.S. imperialism and transform all these countries, no? Which I think will be very good. Also, I would say that I understand what Valielsa was saying about this inconformity about unions, not only in Panama, also occurs in many Latin American countries, which is also a product of neoliberalization, of a huge part of the population being condemned to informal jobs, where only a few part of the population can have these formal jobs and therefore can have these unions. So all these people that are now in this informal job, where they don't have any stable, necessarily stable form of income or any benefit, social security or anything like that, obviously will tend to see these unions or these workers are as even privileged, no, because they have been thrown to this informality, no. But again, this is also because of the effects of neoliberalism, and this actually, instead of going against these unions, we should actually be supporting them, and through them trying to I don't know, change this model, this system that again has created this huge industrial reserve labor in the informality, no. Obviously, also there's another side into this, that some unions have been co-opted by the capitalist class of their own countries, no, and actually work for the employers more than for the employees, no. So I think I can see that in Latin America how it plays, no, but that some unions have actually been co-opted by the capitalist class, and the other sense that this effect of neoliberalism, where most of the population don't have the benefits that some people in unions do have, and it creates kind of this animosity. But obviously, it's not because the people in unions are privileged or anything like that, but they have fought for these benefits and they have been able to maintain them. And obviously, these people in the unions would very likely to have all the people that are in the informal sectors also have good jobs and have unions, no? So I think that's kind of the job we may have to do, not how to bridge these two sectors, the informal and the formal one, to understand that they are not one against the other, as the capitalist class obviously would like to make them be, but they are part of the same class, and they should all try to coordinate to all have stable jobs and all have their representation by unions, and from there to actually attack, go against this capitalist class, which is the source, the root of the problem, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the things about the role of the AFL-CIO is that the AFL-CIO has been involved in setting up corporate unions, pro-capitalist unions, and bribing trade unions. And in fact, the Solidarity Center, which is part of the AFL-CIO International Operations, has received over $1 billion. It gets $70 million a year from the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID for
Wow.
international operations. And they have 62 countries. They have 26 district offices, and they're involved in setting up basically pro-capitalist unions, unions that don't challenge imperialism. And I have to say, and this is very important, you know, Mexico has been a major target of the AFL-CIO and the CIA, because the NAFTA was for an attack on the Mexican working class, privatization of the ejidos, the lands of peasants in Mexico, and for the U.S. to take over, and other Europeans to take over the mines, the railroads, telecom, and Slim, the owner of the telecom, he became a billionaire because of NAFTA, because of the privatization. And basically, this privatization with NAFTA has been continued under USMCA. And the AFL-CIO supported the MCA. It was under Trump. Here you have the AFL-CIO and Trump saying that USMCA would be a good agreement. And the reason is they said, well, there's a clause in there to allow democracy in the Mexican unions. We're going to have democratic unions, and we're going to enforce that. So you have this U.S. State Department and Solidarity Center funded by the U.S. government supervising elections at factories in Mexico. And these unions that they supported were pro-corporate unions. It's better to have a union than no union. But basically, these unions were not real working class unions. They supported capitalism. And they, unfortunately, the unions in Mexico have abandoned the fight for renationalization. There's no campaign for renationalization under workers' control of all the wealth that's been privatized in Mexico, in the land that's been privatized in Mexico. But I would have to say that, I mean, the silence of the AFL-CIO on what's happening in Panama is no accident. And, you know, I think that one of the things we have to fight for in this country is a labor party, is a workers' party that's going to represent not just workers in this country, but workers around the world. Because our solidarity with workers in Panama and Mexico is the way we're going to build a workers' movement to represent the entire working class. And I think, though, that, you know, what we're facing now with the open face of a fascist government is like imperialism in the open. I mean, Trump is an open imperialist. And it's embarrassing for the Democrats and some of the Republicans that you have an open imperialist like him because he lets it all hang out. It belongs to us. Canada belongs to us. Greenland belongs to us, and all these countries. So I think it's actually educating people about what U.S. imperialism is, and that's important because we can build solidarity easier when the United States government is open about what it's doing. And recently, the U.S., I mean, Trump, because they don't want what they call soft power, shut down the National Endowment for Democracy and closed down funding to the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center. So the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center sent out a document, the head of it, talking about how they've been supporting U.S. interests and why Trump should continue to support them. So they reinstated the money to the National Endowment for Democracy. I'm not sure it's in the upcoming budget, but the fact that the AFL-CIO is putting out a document through the Solidarity Center about how the good work they're doing for the United States, you know, in internationally with labor should be a sign of a political problem of what we have to do in the United States as far as breaking relations with the U.S. government and having an accounting of what they've been doing. I know in Mexico, the AFL-CIO was involved in 1990 in overthrowing, attacking a Ford assembly plant in Mexico City and beating up the hired thugs. They killed a worker to overturn the leadership. It was a revolutionary union or a left union at that Ford plant. And there was a big movement of the Ford workers, but they basically broke the union for Ford. And that incident, El Golpe, there's a book about it. There was CIA checks or AFL-CIO getting checks from the government and paying off people in Mexico to support that coup. But that's the operation of the AFL-CIO internationally. So that may be one of the reasons there's silence about what's going on in Panama. But I do think we have to have a political campaign, and maybe the best way we can do that is reach out to the teachers union in Panama, the construction workers union, get some appeals by them to unions in this country. So then we can go to these unions. I know Julian is a member of UAW 4811, educator unions. I mean, get some information out and build solidarity. And I would like to work towards an International Day of Action for the workers and people in Panama, and have actions in Mexico and Brazil, all over the world. That would be very good.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really needed. And I just wanted to ask you, Steve, because I feel like you're probably the most knowledgeable about this, but it's crazy hearing the AFL-CIO, like how far it's fallen, and perhaps it's like the peak of, you know, how captured the organized labor movement has been in the United States. Because, you know, I'm still very much trying to educate myself on labor history. I'm still very much a baby, but I remember reading about the AFL-CIO, you know, how they used to fight each other, and I still haven't got to the part where they actually, you know, merged. But it was the CIO that was the much more like radical, like communist filled party, right? And then I know they had skirmishes, especially when it came to unionizing certain groups like the longshoremen and stuff like that. So it's crazy to hear how far they've fallen from that tradition of organizing to the fact that they're literally just a CIA tool. It's, yeah.
Well, it's the witch hunt, the anti-communist witch hunts that happened in the 50s, 40s and 50s led to purging of left unions. In fact, the ILW was one of the unions that survived. They weren't, it was a left union and they weren't able to destroy it. They tried to deport the president, Harry Bridges, 5 times for being on Australian. So, I mean, there's a long history of trying to purge unions. I think, though, the attacks on the working class here is radicalizing workers. And unlike the 50s, they don't have anything to offer workers in the United States. During the 50s, after the Second World War, the United States had all the gold, had jobs. Auto workers could get jobs and cars. Now they can't afford it, young auto workers. So young people and young workers they can't be bribed because there's nothing to bribe. They're taking away everything they have. So that means that the working class here is going to build a movement against the attacks. And I think building democratic worker unions is critical because, I mean, these issues of what's happening in Panama, what's happening with the U.S. imperialism, the rise of fascism, need to be issues for the working class, for the unions that they have to address. And they really haven't been addressing. That's one of the things that, one of the reasons we have LaborFest to address these issues. But unions should be having debates and discussions on fascism and on capitalism and imperialism and healthcare and what to do about defending what we have. And it's so that's very important. But yeah, I put in the chat. There's going to be a panel on the AFL-CIO, the Solidarity Center, next week, and Jeff Shirky, who's a historian, has written a book about U.S. AFL-CIO, and he's also finishing up a book about the Histadrut in the Israeli Trade Union Federation and the relationship of the United States to the Zionist Federation, because they were involved in the Histadrut was involved in supplying guns and the Israeli government with right-wing forces in El Salvador, in Guatemala, arming fascist forces, and nobody knows about it. In fact, the Histadrut supported the South African government. They supplied the apartheid government. They supplied weapons and tanks to the South African government. So, I mean, that ideology, Zionist ideology, racist ideology, they work with the United States and the CIA and the AFL-CIO leadership. They still do. That's why there is a campaign to break the relationship of the Histadrut to the AFL-CIO, to say we don't want to have anything to do with it's a racist union. It's supporting the genocide in Gaza. They're actually contributing money to IDF forces. So, I mean, that's, and the AFL-CIO is affiliated it. Somebody put in the chat. Yeah, the ILW and the United Electrical Workers were the only two unions really to survive the witch hunts. So I mean, there's now an openness in the unions and the working class about politics. Politics is coming to the fore, and I know that in my union, the CWA, I'm in the journalist union. They didn't even want to talk about fascism. I said we're going to have a national convention in the News Guild. Is there going to be a session there on repression, fascism? I mean, Trump called journalists scum, the language of Hitler, and they said no. Well, you know, but so they're not even organizing politically to with the members. What are we going to do? How are we going to organize? And that's a very dangerous thing if you're not prepared politically for what's happening. And I think that's something that working people, unions have to do, and that's critical.
I wanted to go back to that point that you made about I think I'd made it earlier on, talking about how a lot of the workers unions in Latin America have completely dropped the topic of like nationalization and taking the music production back into workers' hands. And I'm not gonna lie, that's kind of the first thing that came across my mind when I saw that Chiquita Banana had laid off its entire workforce in Changuinola. My first thought was, oh, is this an opportunity for like Panamanian workers to actually own their own bananas that they have been having to export all over the world? And I know it's not so easy because, like Julian was saying, like, they take a lot of like the machinery away as well, right? They're not going to leave a lot of their capital just laying around. But I mean, my family that's there was telling me that, there are huge shipping containers that are just full of rotting bananas, right? Because they're not going anywhere. So it's really interesting, and I wonder if that's something that I'm not sure. Do you know what union is representing the banana pickers, Steve or Julian?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know the exact name, but yeah, I know there's one, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about if they would actually encourage its workers to take the means of production, which I think actually would be the best thing to do. No, if a company is leaving, they should strike and not let this company get its machines out, so they can manage it themselves. No, I think that's uh, what I think should be the best thing to do, because I think Chiquita was saying that they would even cease operations. No, so I think that's the perfect moment to actually take over the machines or the tools they use. But yeah, I guess I don't know.
Yeah, so I definitely want to see if I can do a little bit more digging to see if I can try to talk to some of those workers, because so my family lives in Almirante, which is a port town in Bocas del Toro, and we actually couldn't get, so it's my grandmother mostly that's there, and when Mulino actually cut telecommunications, so he cut the phone lines and he cut the internet to Bocas del Toro for like 9 days, we weren't able to get into contact with my grandmother. Um, it was pretty frightening, but yeah, they essentially, what I'm trying to say is that my family like lives right next to the plantation, so I'm sure we can get a hold of some of the people that have been affected. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how much of the state is repressing Bocas del Toro, because something my mom has always told me was, oh yeah, like the government never pays any attention to us, right? Because Bocas is the westernmost region right next to Costa Rica, and Panama City, the capital, is like much further away. To get from Panama City to Almirante is like 8-hour bus ride, right? It's not easily accessible, but that region has always been the poorest region. I mean, behind the comarcas regions, which is where the indigenous people live, and that's a whole other level of repression and abandonment that the Panamanian regime really engages in. They're really quite racist against indigenous people there, like so racist. And Julian, I would love to hear like what the Mexican sentiment is against indigenous people, because in Panama it's so bad. It's actually insane like how openly racist people are against the indigenous people. But anyway, behind the autonomous indigenous territories, Bocas del Toro has been the poorest region in the country for a long time. They don't often have reliable electricity. They don't really have safe drinking water all the time, right? I think unemployment is also like among the highest there. So it's really interesting to see all the focus being really directed there, because it's like the poorest people, and seeing these videos online that are being circulated of like riot cops and like storm gear, with like flamethrowers, like going into people's houses and beating them up and kidnapping them, these people like living in the villages, right? It's very, yeah, it's very barbaric. um and it's just really interesting, because I think this is the first time that like that region has really been in the spotlight. It's usually always like Panama City and stuff like that. So it's very strange for me and my family to see like, oh, the center of the action is on Bocas del Toro. Okay, like, yeah.
The agricultural workers in Central Latin America have a long history. I know in Costa Rica, there was a struggle of the agricultural workers against pesticides because people were being poisoned by the pesticides. And there was a campaign in the unions actually against the massive use of pesticide. So that was a political campaign because people get cancer, people get contaminated, and the capitalists, of course, don't care that the poisons they use, as well as here, that people get poisoned and get sick. So I think that's another reason for internationalism for education. And you know, the one of the things that's going on, and again, we have to talk about the new developments, is that the use of these tariffs and trade war by Trump is much more brutal and overt than under the Democrats. I don't support the Democrats, I support a Labor Party, but what they're doing now openly, and it's done maybe underhanded by the Democrats, is they're saying to countries, you're going to like, we're going to do tariffs on bananas, or else you have to do exactly what we say. It's the remolding of Latin America and Central America with the threat of tariffs. And this is a very dangerous thing. It's just beginning, actually. He's only been in office 6 months. But when he threatens to use tariffs, I mean, small countries, Lesotho in Africa, I mean, a tariff there is creating havoc because they're dependent on exports. In a small country, like Panama, is really dependent on exports. So this is really a life and death struggle for people around the world. And I don't think it's really recognized at all about how the people of Central and Latin America are going to be impacted by this fascist regime. That has to be a discussion, and we have to have education about it because it's going to have massive ramifications. I mean, the fact that Trump openly says to Brazil, we're going to have a 50% tariff unless you release Bolsonaro is direct political intervention using the economic power of U.S. imperialism. That hasn't happened, for a long time. I mean, what they've done is overthrow governments, but they're hidden coups. I mean, the military coups in Brazil and Argentina and Chile were undercover. They supported them, but they weren't open. That's the thing about Trump. He's open about it. This is our agenda, and we're going to use our economic power to do this, as well as support military intervention. I know in Argentina, the CIA has been active in U.S. military trying to reestablish bases in Argentina under Milei. So this is a whole new, actually, political situation in Central and Latin America. I mean, of the latest stage of U.S. imperialism, U.S. capitalism. I mean, it's a decline. U.S. imperialism is in decline, and that is why they're becoming more desperate and more adventurous. Because as an imperial empire, they are declining. They can't compete against China. That's why they wanted China to stop investing on the ports in Panama. I mean, it's an inter-imperialist rivalry, and countries like Panama are paying that cost of that inter-imperialist rivalry of what's going on, and it happened in Peru as well. And it really there hasn't been that much coverage of the role of U.S. imperialism now, trying to prevent the people of Panama, the people of Colombia, the people of Brazil having independence. But actually, you really can't have independence in a real sense when you have these imperialist empires, you know, fighting each other over who's going to control the wealth of the world. And that's really what's going on. But if we could get, in connection with the banana workers, that would be important in Panama. And also the Panama workers on the canal, because they're affected too. They may try to break the unions there. I think the Panama Union probably is very strong. The ILWU used to represent some of the Panama workers on the canal, but they split. They had a political disagreement, and they separated because apparently, the way the ILWU operates, they didn't want them to organize the vote the way they did in Panama, as I understand it. But we have to work to get Panamanian unions to make some appeals to U.S. workers and workers around the world so we can build kind of an international movement for them. That would be very important. Maybe we can work on a panel later on in the year of Panamanian workers, and their struggle, and also the banana workers. That would be great to have a panel on what's on different sectors in Panama, their struggle. That would be a breakthrough, actually, to have that kind of panel for the people in the United States and workers would be a good thing to see.
Yeah, I'll definitely see what I can do with my connections on the ground because my family is definitely very apolitical. But since they are very close to people that have been impacted by this, I'll try my best to see what I can find.
Okay. And we do have, contacts with the Suntrax union. We did interview them. In fact, that's, I think, the only interview that's been done that I know in the United States for American audience about what's going on in Panama. And Julian and Peter were involved in doing that interview. But we should try to talk to them again and see if we can get a panel together of sectors from Panama. Okay, would anybody else like to ask a question or make a comment? Don't be shy. Okay, well, if not, I want to thank you all for joining us. And I think it's been valuable to have this discussion on the struggle in Panama, and uh, check out the other events in LaborFest. One of the things we're having this coming weekend is a conference on labor AI and labor tech. And we're going to be having presentations about how AI and the techno-fascists have taken over the US and are trying to use AI to destroy workers' jobs, to spy on workers, and also politically to crush any kind of opposition. So that's going to be on Saturday at 11:30 at 518 Valencia. And we're going to be having some other events as well on, as I put up there, we're going to have this panel on the AFL-CIO and the Solidarity Center. So I think that's going to be very useful. So thank you, brothers and sisters. Solidarity.
Solidarity.